Good evening, friends. And I have a thought that I've been thinking over the last few days that, when they welcome to country on all the parliament speeches and even on websites and whatnot, they welcome to country and they recognise the traditional owners of the land and being the Aboriginal people in Australia. But they often say the welcome to country at the beginning of their speeches and certainly in writing. But have they ever gotten the rights to practice law in Australia from those traditional owners that they pay respect to? So where I'm going with this is that we can clearly see that our parliamentarians don't obey the Constitution. And I uphold the Constitution, and it is the will of the people as such, and it is what gives Australia its basis in law. But when you sort of see by their own mouth that they're acknowledging the traditional owners and of the land here in Australia, do they have a document from those traditional owners that gives the Parliament the right to practice law on this land? So where I'm going with this is that if you can show, and just thinking along these lines, if you can show that they, by their own admission, that acknowledge that there's something underneath them, say the traditional owners of the land, and the land belongs to somebody else, not them, or has belonged at least to somebody else, not them, and they acknowledge that by their own words, do they have a document that they can show that the traditional owners have given them the rights to practice law on the land? So in going with it, I'm thinking to actually ask some of these people that are throwing their weight around in the law. I'm not, obviously saying to be lawless in any way, but if you're in a situation, this is what I'm thinking, if you're in a situation where you can tell they're not obeying the Constitution, can you put to them that do you acknowledge the traditional owners of the land? And they would mostly say yes. I'm pretty sure just about everybody would say yes. But if you then ask them, well, then do you have a legal right to practice law on this land that's been given by them? They would have a very hard time showing you that document because I'm pretty sure it doesn't exist. So on that basis, you could say, look, if you can't prove that you have the legal right to practice law as given by the traditional owners of the land to practice your law on this land, then how on earth does it make your laws lawful? So then that puts them into a situation, this is what I'm thinking, but it would put them into a situation where they would have to derive their source of authority from the Constitution. Again, because you could come at them and say what they're doing is unconstitutional, and they would argue the point that, well, look, it doesn't matter. Or basically, they would just argue the toss there with that one. But if you said, well, look, if you're not given authority by the traditional owners to be here to do what you do, and to practice law on this land, then by what authority are you claiming your basis? So then they would probably have to say English law and the Commonwealth Constitution, I'm guessing. So then you could then say that, well, then why aren't you obeying the Constitution? So then you have them on two counts. One is they don't have lawful right to be here practicing law that doesn't have didn't gain authority by the traditional owners whom they recognise at the beginning of every speech and even on the Parliament website, right? But if they can't prove that they have lawful basis to practice law here from the traditional owners, then they would then say that they will use the Constitution, but then you would say, well, why aren't you obeying the Constitution then? Where's the basis that you're claiming for these laws from the Constitution? And if you know your Constitution, then that puts you in a pretty strong position because you've got two counts that you can say that they're in fact a lawless body, a law unto themselves, So just a thought for you and to have a think about it. I 100% support our Commonwealth Constitution, but also if you're stuck in a bind and they can't, they're saying basically that they don't need to obey the Commonwealth Constitution, then you could go down the other path and play chess with them. This is just what I'm thinking, but you could play chess with them and say, look, you acknowledge the traditional owners of this country, and almost all of them, if not all of them, would say yes. And you say, well, look, do you have authority in law to practice law on land that belongs to them? So then they would have to say, well, look, no, we don't have that document. Or yes, if they say, yes, we do, then you would say, well, show me. Because you can pretty well be sure as eggs they don't actually have that document at all. And you could pretty well check with any Aboriginal person and ask them, were they consulted or what went into making up this document? I mean, you could actually explore the whole thing. And if they would ask you, if you're Aboriginal, you could say, well, look, I don't have to disclose that under the Privacy Act. So even if you're not Aboriginal, you could actually ask those questions. So just some thoughts for you. And if you like it, why don't you give it a go? Just see what they say. You've got nothing to lose. God bless you, friends. See you later. Bye-bye.